The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly on the crowded port of Tortuga as Isabella clutched her swollen belly, watching the last merchant ship disappear beyond the horizon. With no money, no passage home, and a baby due within months, she stood alone among the most dangerous men in the Caribbean. The notorious Captain Blackwood observed her from his ship's deck, intrigued by the pregnant woman who refused to beg or weep, despite her desperate circumstances. When she approached his vessel with her chin held high, demanding work in exchange for shelter, his crew laughed, but Blackwood saw something different in her fierce green eyes, a determination that reminded him of his own hunger for survival. "I need motivation," he told her with a calculating smile, "and you need a place where you can live. But what happens when a ruthless pirate discovers that protecting someone else might be his greatest treasure?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Isabella Mendoza had once worn silk gowns and attended governor's balls, but those days felt like someone else's life entirely. 6 months pregnant and abandoned in the roughest port in the Caribbean, she twisted the simple gold wedding ring on her finger, the only reminder of her former existence. Her husband Edmund had left her here with nothing but empty promises to return, sailing away when her pregnancy became inconvenient for his shipping empire's reputation. The ornate compass in Captain Blackwood's weathered hands never pointed true north. Much like the man himself, James Blackwood had earned his fearsome reputation through 15 years of calculated piracy, never taking unnecessary risks, never showing mercy to those who crossed him. Yet something about the pregnant woman's defiance intrigued him in ways he couldn't quite understand. "You're either very brave or very foolish," Blackwood said, studying Isabella as she stood on his ship's deck. The crew of the Siren's Revenge watched with barely concealed hostility. Taking a pregnant woman aboard was unprecedented, potentially unlucky, certainly impractical. "I prefer brave," Isabella replied, her Spanish accent lending dignity to her desperate circumstances. "I can read and write in 3 languages, I understand medicine and herbs, and I'm willing to earn my place here." First Mate Rodriguez, a scarred veteran with gold teeth, spat over the rail. "Captain, she'll be nothing but trouble. Women aboard ship bring bad luck, and pregnant ones." He shook his head in disgust. Blackwood silenced him with a look. The crew respected their captain's judgment, even when they disagreed with it. He had never steered them wrong before, had made them all rich men through careful planning and strategic strikes against Spanish treasure fleets. "The arrangement is simple," Blackwood continued, his dark eyes never leaving Isabella's face. "You provide motivation for my continued entrepreneurial activities. Your presence reminds me why I do what I do, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In return, you have shelter, food, and protection until your child is born." Isabella understood the subtext. She would be a living conscience for a man who had forgotten he possessed one. It was an unusual bargain, but she had no alternatives. The other ships in port either wouldn't take taxons or demanded payment she didn't possess. "I accept your terms," she said, extending her hand to shake on the agreement. The crew murmured disapprovingly, but Blackwood clasped her hand briefly. Her fingers were soft, but her grip was firm. She had been raised a lady, but possessed the strength to survive whatever came next. "Rodriguez, prepare the cabin next to mine," Blackwood ordered. "Make sure it's clean and comfortable." "Captain, that's the best cabin on the ship besides yours," Rodriguez protested. "Exactly." Blackwood's tone brooked no argument. "Miss Valdez." Isabella lied smoothly, using her mother's maiden name. Her true identity as Admiral Mendoza's daughter would only complicate matters. "Mrs. Valdez will be treated with respect by every man on this ship. Anyone who fails to do so will answer to me personally." The implied threat was clear. Blackwood's reputation for dealing with insubordination was legendary throughout the Caribbean. Men had been marooned on deserted islands for lesser offenses than disrespecting someone under his protection. As the sun set over Tortuga's notorious harbor, Isabella settled into her new reality. Through her cabin's small porthole, she could see the lights of taverns and brothels, hear the raucous laughter of pirates celebrating successful raids. This world was as far from her pampered upbringing as she could imagine. Yet it offered something her previous life never had: the possibility of genuine purpose. She placed her hands over her swelling belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. "We're going to survive this," she whispered, "whatever it takes." On deck above, Blackwood studied his compass by lantern light. The needle spun wildly, pointing toward magnetic anomalies and hidden reefs rather than true north. He had learned to navigate by instinct and experience rather than conventional instruments. Perhaps that was why Isabella's arrival didn't trouble him as much as it should have. Change was coming. He could feel it in the wind. The question was whether that change would destroy everything he had built, or transform it into something he had never dared imagine. The weathered document Rodriguez placed before Isabella contained rules written in multiple hands, amendments added over years of practical experience. The ship's articles outlined everything from division of spoils to punishment for cowardice, each law signed in blood by men who understood that survival at sea required absolute commitment. "Every soul aboard this vessel must sign," Rodriguez explained, his scarred fingers tracing the parchment's edge. "Captain's orders. No exceptions, even for passengers." Isabella read carefully, her educated mind parsing the archaic language and maritime terminology. Some clauses were reasonable: equal shares of food and water, protection of wounded crew members, loyalty in battle. Others chilled her blood. Desertion meant marooning. Theft from fellow crew members brought flogging. Cowardice in combat earned death. "I understand the necessity," she said finally, accepting the quill. "But I want one addition." The crew members gathered around laughed harshly. "Pregnant women don't negotiate with pirates." "Signora," called out a toothless gunner named Murphy. "This one does." Isabella's voice carried the authority she had learned at her father's knee, watching him command naval vessels. "I want protection for my unborn child, written into these articles. If something happens to me, the crew agrees to ensure the baby reaches safe harbor." Blackwood emerged from his cabin, as if summoned by the tension. "What's the delay?" "The lady wants special terms," Rodriguez reported, clearly disapproving. Blackwood examined the document, then nodded slowly. "Reasonable request. Add it." "Captain," several crew members protested. "Add it," Blackwood repeated, his tone cutting through objections like a blade. "Mrs. Valdez, sign." Isabella's first night aboard proved the articles weren't merely ceremonial. A storm struck without warning, sending waves crashing over the deck and turning the ship into a bucking, violent beast. In her small cabin, Isabella gripped the wooden frame of her bunk and tried not to be sick as the vessel pitched and rolled. A scream from the deck above made her forget her own discomfort. Someone was hurt, crying out in agony between thunder crashes. Isabella wrapped herself in a blanket and made her way topside, struggling against the wind and rain. Young Tommy Briggs, barely 18 and new to piracy, lay writhing near the mainmast. A snapped rope had whipped across his chest, leaving a deep gash that bled freely, despite the rain washing over him. "Get back to your cabin, woman," Rodriguez shouted over the storm. "This is no place for you." But Isabella was already kneeling beside Tommy, examining his wound by lightning flashes. "I need clean cloth and rum," she called out. "Now, she knows medicine?" Blackwood appeared beside her, rain streaming from his dark hair. "My father insisted I learn. He said knowledge was the only treasure that could never be stolen." Isabella tore strips from her petticoat, creating makeshift bandages. "Hold him steady." Blackwood's strong hands kept Tommy from thrashing, while Isabella worked. She cleaned the wound with rum, ignoring the boy's screams, then stitched it closed with needle and thread from her sewing kit. Her movements were sure and precise, despite the ship's violent motion. "There," she said finally, tying off the last stitch. "Keep it clean and dry. Change the bandage daily." Tommy's eyes were wide with gratitude and something approaching worship. "Thank you, Signora. I thought I was going to die." Not on my watch, Isabella replied, helping him to his feet. The storm passed by dawn, leaving behind clear skies and calmer seas. Word of Isabella's medical skills spread quickly through the ship. The crew's hostility began shifting toward grudging respect. She had proven herself useful, even necessary, but their peaceful morning was shattered when the lookout called from the crow's nest. Sail on the horizon, 3 points off the starboard bow. Blackwood raised his spyglass, studying the approaching vessel. His expression darkened. Iron Tooth Martinez. These flying hunting colors. Rodriguez cursed in Spanish. Martinez was Blackwood's most dangerous rival, a pirate captain who ruled through fear and brutality rather than strategy. The two men had history, territorial disputes that had escalated into personal vendetta. Battle stations, Blackwood ordered. Martinez doesn't sail this close to Tortuga without reason. As the crew prepared for potential combat, Isabella retreated to her cabin. Through the porthole, she could see Martinez's ship growing larger, its black flag snapping in the wind. She pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. She had signed the articles, committed herself to this life. Now she would discover whether that commitment extended to facing cannon fire while carrying a child. The leather pouch at Isabella's waist contained her most precious possessions, dried herbs and medicinal plants collected during her travels with Edmund, chamomile for calming nerves, willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop bleeding. Knowledge her governess had dismissed as servant's work now made her invaluable aboard a pirate ship. Martinez's vessel, the Blood Serpent, approached with predatory grace. Its crew lined the rails, weapons glinting in the morning sun. Isabella watched from her cabin porthole as Blackwood's men prepared for battle, their movements efficient and practiced. These weren't desperate criminals, but professional seafarers who happened to earn their living outside the law. Mrs. Valdez, Blackwood appeared at her door. I need you below deck. The hold is the safest place during combat. I can help treat wounded. Isabella protested. You've seen my skills. I've also seen what cannon fire does to human bodies. Your child doesn't need that memory. His concern surprised her. This was the same man whose reputation stretched from Jamaica to the Spanish Main, yet he worried about her unborn baby's well-being. Perhaps their bargain meant more to him than simple motivation. The confrontation with Martinez proved less dramatic than expected. The rival captain sent a small boat across the water under a flag of parley. Isabella listened from the companionway as harsh Spanish voices carried across the water. Blackwood, you grow soft in your old age, Martinez called out, his gold teeth flashing in the sun. Taking women aboard your ship? What's next? Carrying missionaries? My crew arrangements are none of your concern, Martinez. State your business or sail away. 3 Spanish galleons left Cartagena yesterday, heavy with silver from the Potosi mines. Rich prizes for those bold enough to take them. Martinez's scarred face split into a cruel grin. Unless you're too busy playing nursemaid to join a real hunt. Isabella felt the ship's tension like a living thing. The crew wanted those galleons, wanted the fortune they represented. Silver from Spanish America meant months of easy living, enough wealth to retire or purchase better ships and weapons. Where? Blackwood's voice remained level, but Isabella heard the interest beneath his calm exterior. The Windward Passage, tomorrow at dawn, but I need assurance you won't interfere with my claim to the largest vessel. Since when do you need my permission to hunt Spanish gold? Martinez's laugh held no humor. Since I learned one of your crew can read their manifests. Spanish documents require Spanish education, Blackwood. Not many pirates possess such refined skills. Isabella's blood turned to ice water. Martinez knew about her linguistic abilities, her value beyond simple medical knowledge. Someone had been watching, reporting on the ship's activities. They had a spy aboard. The parley ended without agreement. Martinez's boat returning to the Blood Serpent, but the damage was done. Blackwood's crew now knew Isabella could read Spanish documents, making her essential to any hunt for Iberian treasure. It also made her a target. Gather the crew, Blackwood ordered once Martinez had sailed away. We need to discuss our next move. The men assembled on deck, their weather-beaten faces reflecting a mixture of greed and concern. Isabella joined them, ignoring Rodriguez's disapproving look. If they were discussing her fate, she wanted to hear it directly. "Martinez knows too much about our business," Blackwood began. "Someone's been talking. Until we identify the source, we assume everything we do is being watched." Murmurs of anger rippled through the crew. Pirates valued loyalty above all else, and betrayal meant death. Isabella noticed several men avoiding eye contact, their nervous gestures betraying guilt or fear. "What about the Spanish galleons?" asked Peterson, the ship's carpenter. "That much silver could set us all up for life." "It's exactly what Martinez wants us to think," Blackwood replied. "He needs our help, but doesn't want to admit it. 3 galleons means heavy escort, more firepower than one ship can handle alone." "So we work together?" Rodriguez sounded skeptical. "We work smart. Miss Valdez, your Spanish reading skills, how extensive are they?" Isabella stepped forward, conscious of every eye upon her. "I can read official documents, shipping manifests, naval orders. My father insisted on thorough education." "Your father?" The question came from several crew members simultaneously. Isabella realized her mistake immediately. She had revealed too much, opened a door she couldn't close. "He believed educated daughters made better wives," she said carefully. But Blackwood was studying her with new intensity, his dark eyes calculating. Isabella felt exposed, vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with her pregnancy or their dangerous circumstance. Her past was catching up with her, threatening the fragile safety she had found aboard this unlikely refuge. Old Pete's gnarled hands worked the wood with surprising delicacy, carving tiny dolphins around the handle of what would become a baby's rat. The grizzled sailor had been with Blackwood since the beginning, and his secret project represented a shift in the crew's attitude that even he didn't fully understand. "Senora Isabella," he called softly as she passed his workstation. "A moment, if you please." Isabella approached cautious. Pete had been among the most vocal opponents of her presence aboard the ship, muttering about bad luck and women's curses whenever she came near. His weathered face bore scars from a dozen battles, and his missing left eye gave him a permanently fierce expression. "I wanted to give you this," he said, holding up the carved rattle. "For the little one when it comes." Isabella accepted the gift with wonder, running her fingers over the smooth wood and intricate details. "Pete, this is beautiful. You made this?" "Been working on it since that night you saved Tommy. Figured maybe having a baby aboard won't be so cursed, after all." His remaining eye twinkled with something approaching affection. "My own daughter would be about your age now, if the fever hadn't taken her." Before Isabella could respond, the ship's bell rang out in sharp alarm. "All hands on deck." Rodriguez's voice carried across the water. "Martinez is back, and he's brought friends." Isabella stuffed the rattle into her herb pouch and hurried topside. 3 ships approached in battle formation, Martinez's blood serpent flanked by 2 smaller vessels flying the black flag. The Siren's revenge was outnumbered and outgunned. "Load the cannons," Blackwood ordered, his calm voice cutting through the crew's nervous chatter. "Rodriguez, break out the small arms. Peterson, prepare the fire arrows." "Captain," Isabella stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Let me help." "Absolutely not. Get below deck where I can reload muskets, carry ammunition, treat wounded. You need every capable hand, and I've proven myself useful." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, while Martinez's ships drew closer. Isabella could see the logic warring with protectiveness in his dark eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind the main mast. If shooting starts, keep your head down." The battle erupted with thunderous cannon fire that shook the ship's timbers. Isabella crouched behind the mast, helping reload weapons and passing out ammunition, while around her the crew fought with desperate efficient. Smoke filled the air, making her eyes water and her throat burn. A musket ball splintered the wood inches from her head, sending splinters flying. She ducked lower, one hand instinctively protecting her belly, while the other continued passing cartridges to the gunners. "Isabella," Blackwood's voice carried over the chaos. "The surgeon's bag." Tommy's hit again. She crawled across the deck, dodging debris, and keeping low while cannonballs whistled overhead. Tommy lay behind the port rail, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His earlier wound had reopened during the fighting, soaking his shirt crimson. "Hold still," Isabella commanded, tearing open her herb pouch. She worked quickly, binding the head wound with strips torn from her skirt, while around them the battle raged. "Pete, I need your knife. Clean it first with rum." The old sailor obeyed without question, heating his blade over a lantern flame before handing it over. Isabella used it to cut away Tommy's bloodied shirt, exposing the reopened chest wound. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then began stitching the torn flesh back together. Tommy gritted his teeth but didn't cry out, even when she doused the wound with rum to prevent infection. "There's a good lad," Pete murmured, holding Tommy steady. "The Senora knows her business." A cheer went up from the starboard side. Isabella looked up to see Martinez's smallest escort ship, listing heavily, black smoke pouring from its deck. The Siren's Revenge had scored a devastating hit, evening the odds considerably. "They're breaking off," the lookout called. "Martinez is signaling retreat." As the enemy ships limped away, Isabella sat back on her heels, exhausted. Her dress was torn and blood-stained, her hair had escaped its pins, and her hands shook from the aftermath of battle. But she had proven something important to the crew and to herself. "Well fought," Blackwood said, appearing beside her as she finished bandaging Tommy's wounds. "You showed real courage today." "I showed necessity," Isabella corrected. "When people need help, you help them. That's not courage, it's just human decency." Blackwood's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. Perhaps that's the same thing. Around them the crew was cleaning up after the battle, but Isabella noticed the difference in how they looked at her now. She wasn't just the captain's strange passenger anymore, she was part of their family. The cramping started during the night watch, sharp pains that doubled Isabella over and sent cold fear racing through her veins. She was only 7 months along, too early for the baby to come safely. The ship's gentle rocking, usually so soothing, now felt like a mockery of her body's distress. "Captain," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the sound of wind and waves. "Something's wrong." Blackwood appeared at her cabin door within moments, taking one look at her pale face and understanding immediately. "Rodriguez, change course for Port Royal. Emergency." "Captain, that's British territory," Rodriguez protested. "If they recognize us, I don't care if it's the gates of hell itself. Find me a doctor." Blackwood's voice carried absolute authority. Now, as the Siren's Revenge altered course toward the nearest port, Isabella fought waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her. Between contractions, she noticed Blackwood rifling through a sea chest, pulling out a leather portfolio she had never seen before. "What is that?" she gasped. "Insurance," he replied grimly, extracting what appeared to be half of an old map. The parchment was yellowed with age, marked with symbols and notations in multiple hands. "This is why Martinez really wants you, not just for your Spanish reading abilities." Isabella studied the fragment through pain-hazed eyes. The cartography was Spanish colonial, showing part of the Caribbean with detailed notations about currents, reefs, and safe harbors. But more importantly, it marked the location of something labeled Tesoro de Montezuma, Montezuma's treasure. The other half, she managed to ask between contractions. "Martinez has it, or thinks he does. This map leads to the greatest Spanish treasure hoard ever assembled, gold and silver collected by Cortés, but lost when his ship sank in a hurricane. Dozens of men have died searching for it." The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. Here she was, fighting to bring new life into the world, while surrounded by men obsessed with ancient death and buried gold. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you can read the Spanish notation, the sailing directions, the tidal calculations. They're all in academic Spanish, the kind taught in universities, not street Spanish or sailors' cant." Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Isabella gripped the cabin's wooden frame until her knuckles went white. I need that doctor." Port Royal appeared on the horizon as dawn broke, its harbor busy with merchant vessels and British naval ships. Blackwood ordered the pirate flag struck, and a false merchant banner raised in its place. The Siren's revenge would masquerade as a trading vessel, at least long enough to get Isabella medical attention. "Mrs. Valdez," Blackwood said, using her false name carefully. "When we reach port, you're the wife of a Portuguese merchant. I'm your captain escort, hired to protect you during passage to Jamaica. Can you remember that?" Isabella nodded, though speaking was becoming difficult. The contractions were coming closer together now, and she could feel the baby moving restlessly inside her. Margaret Weatherby proved to be a surprise, a middle-aged Scottish woman who had trained in Edinburgh before coming to the Caribbean to treat plantation families. She examined Isabella with competent hands and a reassuring manner. "The child is trying to come early, but we can stop it," she announced. "Complete bed rest for at least a week, maybe longer. No excitement, no stress, and definitely no sea travel." "That's impossible," Blackwood said. "We can't stay in British waters indefinitely." "Then you'll likely lose both mother and child," Dr. Weatherby replied bluntly. "The choice is yours, Captain." Isabella watched Blackwood wrestle with the decision. Staying in Port Royal meant constant danger of discovery, potential arrest, or execution if their true identities were revealed, but leaving meant almost certain death for her and the baby. "We stay," he decided finally. "Whatever the risk." "James," Isabella whispered, using his first name for the first time. "The treasure map. Martinez will never stop hunting us for it. Let him hunt. Some things are more valuable than Spanish gold." As Dr. Weatherby prepared medicines to stop Isabella's premature labor, she discovered something else in her medical bag, a letter bearing official British naval seals. "Interesting," she murmured, studying the document. "It seems there's quite a reward posted for information about a certain Spanish admiral's daughter who disappeared 6 months ago. Isabella Mendoza, they're calling her, worth a king's ransom to the right people." Isabella's blood turned to ice. Her real identity had been discovered, and now she was trapped in enemy territory with nowhere to run. Dr. Weatherby held the British Naval Commission like a loaded weapon, her shrewd eyes moving between Isabella and the official document. The parchment bore Admiral Mendoza's seal and signature, offering substantial reward for information about his missing daughter, dead or alive. "Well, well," the doctor murmured, setting the commission on her examining table. "It seems I'm treating someone quite valuable indeed. Isabella Mendoza, daughter of Spain's most feared admiral, missing since her husband abandoned her in Tortuga." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Isabella Valdez. Child, I've delivered babies to governors' wives and treated bullet wounds for pirate captains. I know desperation when I see it, and I know nobility too. You carry yourself like someone born to command, not like some merchant's cast-off wife." Blackwood stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his cutlass hilt. "Dr. Weatherby, I trust you understand the delicate nature of our situation. Are you threatening me, Captain?" The Scottish woman's voice held no fear, only curiosity. "Because I should tell you I've been threatened by far more dangerous men than you. I'm asking for your discretion. Mrs. Valdez has suffered enough. She needs medical care, not political complications." Dr. Weatherby studied them both for a long moment, then moved to her medicine cabinet. "My oath is to do no harm, Captain. That includes protecting my patients from those who would exploit their vulnerabilities." She mixed powders and herbs into a bitter-tasting tea, explaining the treatment as she worked. "This will help stop the contractions and give the baby more time to develop, but you must remain absolutely still for at least 10 days. Any excitement, any stress, could restart the labor." 10 days in British territory," Blackwood muttered. "We might as well paint targets on our backs. There's something else you should know, Dr. Weatherby continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Martinez isn't the only one hunting for Admiral Mendoza's daughter. The British Admiralty wants her too as a hostage to use against Spanish naval operations. And there are rumors that her husband is still alive, spreading lies about her death to protect his own reputation." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of multiple betrayals. Edmund had not only abandoned her but actively worked to erase her existence. Her father, if he even knew she lived, sought her for political reasons rather than paternal love. And now she had dragged Blackwood and his crew into danger that went far beyond simple piracy. "Why are you helping us?" Isabella asked. "The reward money could set you up for life." Dr. Weatherby smiled grimly. "Because I know what it's like to be a woman alone in a man's world, making impossible choices with no good options. Besides, I have my own reasons for avoiding British naval attention." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo, a fleur-de-lis symbol that marked former French prisoners. Dr. Weatherby had been captured during colonial conflicts, probably tortured for information before somehow gaining her freedom. "We all have our secrets, my dear. The trick is choosing which ones are worth protecting." A commotion in the street outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Isabella could see British Marines marching in formation. Red coats bright in the afternoon sun. Someone was conducting house-to-house searches, checking papers and asking questions. "They're looking for us," Blackwood said grimly. "Someone reported the ship." "Not necessarily," Dr. Weatherby replied, but her voice held uncertainty. "There've been increased patrols lately. Pirates have been hitting merchant vessels closer to port than usual." Isabella struggled to sit up despite the doctor's protests. "James, you have to leave. Take the crew and go. I'll be safe here until the baby comes." "Absolutely not." Blackwood's tone brooked no argument. "We don't abandon our own." "I'm not your own," Isabella protested. "I'm a burden you took on out of misguided chivalry. Don't let that sentiment destroy everything you've built. You signed the articles, your crew, whether you like it or not." The sound of boots on the stairs outside grew louder. Dr. Weatherby moved quickly, helping Isabella into a back room, while Blackwood checked his weapons. The Naval Commission lay forgotten on the examining table, its official seals catching the afternoon light. "If they find that document," Isabella whispered, "we're all dead." Dr. Weatherby snatched up the commission and thrust it into the fireplace. The parchment caught immediately, curling and blackening as Admiral Mendoza's seal melted into unrecognizable wax. "What commission?" she said innocently, just as heavy fists began pounding on her door. The cutlass had belonged to Blackwood's father, its blade etched with salt water and blood from a dozen Caribbean battles. As he pressed the weapon into Isabella's trembling hands, the weight of family history settled between them like an unspoken promise. "I can't use this," Isabella whispered, staring at the curved steel that reflected lamplight in deadly gleams. "I've never held a sword in my life." "You point the sharp end at anyone who threatens you, or the baby," Blackwood replied grimly. "The rest comes naturally, when survival depends on it." Outside Dr. Weatherby's clinic, the British patrol grew more insistent. Heavy boots echoed on wooden stairs, while authoritative voices demanded entry for routine inspection. Isabella's contractions had stopped, but her heart hammered with a different kind of urgency now. "There's a back entrance through my herb garden," Weatherby whispered, gathering medical supplies into a canvas bag. "It leads to the docks through a maze of alleyways, but you'll need to move quickly and quietly." "What about you?" Isabella asked. "If they find evidence we were here, let me worry about that. I've dealt with British interrogations before." The storm that had been building all day finally broke as they prepared to leave. Rain lashed against the clinic's windows while thunder rolled across Court Royal's harbour like cannon fire. Isabella clutched the cutlass and her herb pouch, both lifelines in an increasingly desperate situation. "Stay close," Blackwood ordered, checking his pistols one final time. "If we get separated, head for the ship. Rodriguez has orders to sail with or without us if things go badly." They slipped out through Dr. Weatherby's garden as the front door splintered under British axes. Isabella bit back a cry of pain as another contraction hit, weaker than before, but still present. The medicine was helping, but her body remained on the edge of crisis. The narrow alleyways behind the clinic formed a labyrinth of shadows and hiding places. Isabella followed Blackwood's sure footsteps, trusting his knowledge of ports and escape routes. developed over years of similar emergencies. Her swollen belly made stealth difficult, but desperation lent her unusual grace. There, Blackwood pointed through the rain toward the harbor. The Siren's Revenge is anchored beyond the patrol boats. We just need to reach that fishing boat without being seen. Isabella nodded, unable to speak as another contraction gripped her. The baby seemed to sense the danger, moving restlessly as if trying to escape the womb's increasingly fragile protection. She pressed her free hand against her belly, silently willing the child to wait just a little longer. The fishing boat's owner proved to be one of Rodriguez's contacts, a weathered Jamaican who asked no questions and demanded only gold for his services. As they rowed through the stormy harbor, Isabella watched Port Royal's lights fade behind them while British patrol boats searched systematically through the anchored vessels. "They're getting close to our ship," she observed, seeing the redcoats boarding a merchant vessel 2 berths away from the Siren's Revenge. "Rodriguez will handle it," Blackwood assured her, but tension lines around his eyes betrayed his concern. "He's talked his way out of worse situations." The labor pains returned with vengeance as they approached their ship, each contraction stronger than the last. Isabella gripped the cutlass until her knuckles went white, using the weapon as an anchor point for her consciousness as pain threatened to overwhelm her. Rodriguez called down from the deck. "Thank God you're safe. The British searched us an hour ago, but they found nothing suspicious. Apparently we're just another Portuguese trading vessel." Getting Isabella aboard required careful maneuvering, her condition making the rope ladder impossible to navigate alone. Blackwood climbed beside her, supporting her weight while crew members hauled them both over the rail. The moment her feet touched the familiar deck, another massive contraction hit. "The baby's coming," she gasped. "I can't stop it this time." Old Pete appeared with blankets and boiled water, his scarred face creased with worry. "The berthing cabin's ready, senor. Everything clean and prepared, just like you taught us." As thunder crashed overhead, and British patrol boats continued their search, Isabella felt her body surrendering to forces beyond her control. The child would be born tonight, in the middle of a storm, aboard a pirate ship surrounded by enemies. But as Blackwood's strong hands guided her toward the cabin, she realized something had fundamentally changed between them. He wasn't just protecting his investment anymore. He was fighting for his family. The cutlass remained clutched in her grip, a symbol of the life they would defend together against whatever came next. The brass ship's bell, that hung in Isabella's makeshift berthing cabin, had once graced her father's flagship, the Santa Maria de la Victoria. Old Pete had salvaged it years ago from a Spanish wreck, never knowing its true significance until this moment, when Admiral Mendoza's daughter labored beneath its silent watch. 3 battles raged simultaneously around the Siren's Revenge. British patrol boats closed in from the east, their cannons primed and marines ready. Martinez's fleet approached from the west, black flags snapping in the storm wind. And in the cabin below, Isabella fought the most important battle of all, bringing new life into a world gone mad with violence. "I can see the baby's head," Dr. Weatherby announced, having insisted on staying aboard despite the danger. "One more push, Isabella. Your child wants to meet you." Outside, cannons roared as the 3-way naval battle erupted. The Siren's Revenge shuddered under enemy fire, her timbers groaning with each impact. Isabella gripped the ship's bell rope with one hand and Blackwood's fingers with the other, using their strength to anchor herself against the overwhelming pain. "James," she gasped, between contractions, "if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen," he replied fiercely, though his face was pale with worry. "You're too stubborn to die, and this baby has too much of your fighting spirit." Another cannonball struck the ship's hull, sending vibrations through the cabin. Isabella cried out, but whether from pain or fear, no one could tell. The baby's arrival would not wait for safer circumstances. On deck above, Rodriguez commanded the gun crews with practiced efficiency. "Target Martinez's main mast, bring down his sailing capacity." The first mate had served with Blackwood for 8 years, and their tactical understanding needed no words. The British patrol boats had formed a battle line, trying to sink both pirate vessels simultaneously. But Martinez's larger fleet concentrated their fire on the naval ships, creating a chaotic melee that worked in everyone's favor except the Crown's. "The baby's coming," Dr. Weatherby called out as another massive contraction seized Isabella. "Don't fight it, child. Let your body do what it knows how to do." Isabella bore down with strength she didn't know she possessed, her scream of effort mixing with the thunder and cannon fire. The ship's bell chimed softly with each shuddering impact against the hull, creating a strange lullaby for the arriving child. "It's a girl," Dr. Weatherby announced as the baby slipped into the world. "A perfect, beautiful girl." The infant's first cry rose above the sounds of battle, a pure note of life that seemed to pause the violence momentarily. Isabella sobbed with relief and exhaustion as Dr. Weatherby placed the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. "She's so small," Isabella whispered, touching the baby's dark hair with trembling fingers. "But listen to those lungs." Blackwood stared at the child in wonder, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he traced the baby's miniature features. "She looks like you. Same stubborn chin, same fierce eyes." The battle above reached its crescendo as Martinez's flagship engaged the largest British vessel in single combat. Explosions shook the water, while musket fire rattled like deadly rain. But in the cabin below, peace had descended like a protective blessing. "What will you name her?" Weatherby asked, cleaning and swaddling the baby in soft cotton. "Elena," Isabella said without hesitation. "After my grandmother, Elena Mendoza de Valdez." She looked at Blackwood meaningfully. "She'll carry both names, both legacies." A tremendous crash from above indicated that someone's mainmast had fallen. Rodriguez's voice carried down through the companionway. "Martinez is finished. His ship's taking water fast." "And the British," Blackwood called back, running for port with their tails between their legs. "We're clear, Captain." As if summoned by the news of victory, baby Elena opened her eyes for the first time. They were dark like her mother's, but held a spark that reminded Isabella of Blackwood's fierce intelligence. This child would grow up knowing both worlds, the refinement of Spanish nobility and the freedom of the Caribbean seas. "She's perfect," Blackwood said softly, his voice rose with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Isabella smiled through her exhaustion, watching this feared pirate captain transformed by the presence of new life. The ship's bell chimed one final time as the storm began to clear, its brass surface reflecting lamplight like a blessing from her father's distant world. Elena Mendoza de Valdez had been born free, under no flag but that of her own choosing. It seemed like the perfect beginning for an extraordinary life. The new ship's log bore Isabella's careful handwriting alongside Blackwood's bold script, their combined entries marking a transformation from piracy to partnership. 6 weeks after Elena's birth, the Siren's Revenge had become something unprecedented in Caribbean waters, a family vessel where traditional maritime law bent to accommodate new realities. Co-captain Isabella Valdez, Rodriguez read from the freshly written articles, his scarred face breaking into an uncharacteristic grin. "Has a nice sound to it, don't you think?" Isabella adjusted baby Elena in the specially crafted sling across her chest, marveling at how quickly the crew had adapted to their unusual circumstances. Old Pete had carved a tiny cradle that could be secured to any surface during rough weather. Tommy Briggs had sewn waterproof covers to protect the baby from spray and salt air. Even the most grizzled pirates spoke in whispers when Elena slept. "The Martinez threat is finished," Blackwood announced to the assembled crew. "His ship lies at the bottom of Port Wall Harbor, and his surviving men have scattered to other captains. But that doesn't mean we can return to our old ways." The crew murmured among themselves, uncertainty mixing with anticipation. Some had sailed with Blackwood for years, accumulating enough prize money to retire comfortably. Others were younger men still hungry for adventure and easy wealth. The question hanging unspoken in the Caribbean air was simple. What came next? "We have choices to make," Isabella said, her voice carrying the authority she had earned through blood and courage. "We can continue as pure pirates, taking Spanish treasure and dodging naval patrols. We can try to go legitimate, using our accumulated wealth to establish trading businesses. Or we can find some middle ground, privateering with letters of marque from friendly nations. What do you recommend, Captain? Asked Peterson, the ship's carpenter, who had become one of Isabella's most vocal supporters. Isabella exchanged a meaningful look with Blackwood. They had discussed this decision during the long nights of Elena's first weeks, weighing options while their daughter slept between them in the captain's cabin they now shared. I recommend we establish a base of operations, Isabella said, somewhere we can operate legally while maintaining the flexibility to pursue opportunities as they arise. Blackwood stepped forward, unrolling a detailed chart of the Caribbean islands. There's an island here, 20 leagues southeast of Jamaica, deep water harbor, fresh springs, defendable position. The Spanish claim it, but they've never established a settlement. We could build something there. A pirate kingdom? Old Pete asked, his remaining eye gleaming with interest. A trading post, Isabella corrected gently, with warehouses, repair facilities and guest quarters for merchant captains who need safe harbor. We charge reasonable fees for services, maintain neutrality in colonial conflicts, and gradually legitimize our operations. The crew studied the chart with growing enthusiasm. The island Blackwood had identified sat astride major shipping lanes, perfectly positioned to serve both legal and less legal maritime activities. Ships could dock for repairs and supplies without questions asked about their previous ports of call. And if the Spanish object to our presence, Rodriguez inquired, then we remind them that possession requires the ability to maintain possession. Blackwood replied with his old predatory smile. The Siren's Revenge isn't the only armed vessel in these waters looking for purpose. Weatherby, who had chosen to remain with them rather than return to Port Royal, raised a practical concern. You'll need more than just pirates to build a successful settlement. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, people with families who want stable lives. Exactly, Isabella agreed. We offer sanctuary to anyone fleeing persecution, debt, or bad marriages. Spanish colonists tired of corruption, British subjects avoiding press gangs, French refugees from plantation uprisings. We become what the Caribbean needs, a place where people can start over. Baby Elena chose that moment to wake up, her tiny voice adding commentary to the discussion. Isabella rocked her gently while continuing to speak. The sight of their fierce co-captain managing an infant somehow making the entire crew more confident in their unusual future. It won't be easy, Blackwood warned. We'll face challenges from colonial governors, rival pirates, and anyone who sees our independence as a threat to established order. When has anything worthwhile ever been easy? Tommy Briggs called out, earning nods and murmurs of agreement from his shipmates, all in favor of establishing our settlement on. Isabella paused, realizing they needed a name for their future home. Esperanza, old Pete suggested quietly. Hope Island seems fitting for a place where people go to start fresh. The vote was unanimous. The Siren's Revenge would sail for Hope Island within the week, carrying not just former pirates, but the seeds of something entirely new in Caribbean waters, a community built on mutual respect rather than fear, partnership rather than domination, and the revolutionary idea that people could choose their own destinies regardless of birth or background. The forged trading license bore impressive seals from the Dutch West India Company, authorizing Valdez and Associates to conduct legitimate commerce throughout the Caribbean. Isabella studied the document with professional appreciation. Whoever had created it possessed remarkable skills in duplicating official paperwork. Cost me a small fortune in Curaçao, Blackwood admitted, watching 6-month-old Elena attempt to grasp the colorful ribbons attached to the fake charter. But Dutch colonial bureaucrats don't ask uncomfortable questions if the bribes are large enough. Hope Island had transformed beyond recognition during their months of settlement. What began as a simple pirate base had evolved into a thriving community of refugees, reformed criminals, and ambitious merchants seeking opportunities outside traditional colonial control. The harbor now hosted legitimate trading vessels alongside more questionable craft, all flying the neutral flag. Isabella had designed a golden compass rose on blue silk. Captain Valdez called out Maria Santos, a former Spanish colonial administrator who now managed their warehouses. The sugar shipment from Barbados has arrived, and Captain Morrison wants to discuss regular supply contracts. Isabella handed Elena to her father and walked toward the harbor, marveling at how quickly their experimental community had attracted serious business interest. Ships from Dutch, French, and even British colonies now made regular stops at Hope Island, drawn by competitive prices and the promise of no interference from colonial tax collectors. Morrison's legitimate, Blackwood observed, studying the approaching merchant captain through his spyglass. His ship's papers are genuine, his cargo manifests match customs declarations, and he's never been accused of smuggling. Unlike some people we know, Isabella replied with gentle teasing, accepting Elena back as the baby began fussing for her feeding. The contrast between their current respectability and their piratical past sometimes felt surreal. Isabella now wore practical but elegant dresses instead of torn sailing clothes, her hair properly arranged and her hands soft from using servants rather than scrubbing decks. Blackwood had trimmed his beard and acquired the mannerisms of a successful merchant, though his eyes still held the calculating sharpness that had made him legendary among Caribbean pirates. Mama, Elena babbled, reaching for Isabella's pearl necklace, a gift from Blackwood using legitimate profits from their trading ventures. The baby's vocabulary was expanding daily, picking up words in Spanish, English, and the maritime pidgin spoken by their diverse crew. She'll grow up truly bilingual, Isabella mused, settling into the rocking chair Blackwood had commissioned from their resident carpenter. English for business, Spanish for culture, and sailors can't for when she needs to curse properly. Their success hadn't gone unnoticed by less legitimate operators. Captain Bloody William Cross had been making inquiries about Hope Island's defenses, apparently convinced that their prosperity made them vulnerable to attack. His reputation for brutality exceeded even Martinez's former cruelty, and intelligence suggested he commanded at least 3 well-armed vessels. Cross isn't Martinez, Blackwood warned during their evening planning session. Martinez was greedy and predictable. Cross is genuinely insane, and that makes him dangerous in ways we can't anticipate. Then we prepare for the unpredictable, Isabella replied, reviewing their defensive capabilities while nursing Elena. How many fighters can we muster? 47 of our original crew, plus maybe 20 colonists with military experience. Against Cross's 3 ships, that might not be enough. Isabella studied their island's natural defenses on the detailed map they had commissioned. Hope Island's harbor could be blocked by sinking a ship in the narrow channel, but that would trap them as effectively as any enemy. The high cliffs on the eastern shore provided excellent cannon positions, but required moving heavy artillery up steep paths. We need allies, she decided. Other captains who have reason to oppose Cross, colonial governors who benefit from our neutral trading status, maybe even some of those reformed pirates who've settled in Port Antonio. You're thinking like a diplomat now, instead of a pirate, Blackwood observed with approval. Admiral Mendoza would be proud of his daughter's strategic thinking. Isabella smiled at the mention of her father, though the expression held complexity. She had written to him twice since Elena's birth, using carefully worded letters that revealed her survival without exposing their location. His responses, when they came, mixed paternal relief with professional frustration at her choice of companions. Papa always said that successful naval campaigns require building coalitions. Isabella replied, the principle applies equally well to defending trading posts. Elena fell asleep in her mother's arms as the sun set over their improbable kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reflected off the harbor's calm waters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and quite possibly new threats from Captain Cross's murderous fleet. But tonight, surrounded by the community they had built from nothing more than determination and mutual trust, Isabella felt something she had never experienced in her privileged Spanish upbringing, the deep satisfaction of creating something worth defending. The governor's pardon arrived on Elena's first birthday, carried by a British naval courier who seemed genuinely surprised to find Hope Island transformed into a respectable trading settlement. The official document, signed by Governor Henry Morgan himself, granted full amnesty to Captain James Blackwood and associates in recognition of their valuable contributions to Caribbean commerce and regional stability. "Morgan knows exactly what he's doing," Isabella observed, studying the elaborate seals and ribbons that decorated the pardon. "He's legitimizing us officially so he can use our services unofficially." Elena toddled around the governor's mansion they had built overlooking the harbor, her first birthday celebrated with gifts from colonists, reformed pirates, and legitimate merchants alike. Old Pete had carved her a miniature ship that floated perfectly in wash basins. Dr. Weatherby had sewn a tiny doctor's coat, complete with pockets for toy medical instruments. Even their stern harbormaster, former Spanish naval officer Captain Herrera, had contributed a child-sized compass. "The girl will grow up thinking this is normal," Blackwood mused, watching Elena attempt to feed cake to her wooden doll. Pardoned pirates, international traders, and reformed criminals all living together peacefully. Maybe that's what normal should look like, Isabella replied, resting her hand on her growing belly. 3 months along with their second child, she had been fighting morning sickness while managing increasingly complex business negotiations. The transformation of Hope Island continued to exceed their wildest projections. What had started as a simple pirate refuge now hosted a permanent population of nearly 300 souls. Former slaves worked alongside reformed convicts. Spanish colonists fleeing corruption dealt peacefully with Dutch merchants, avoiding Amsterdam's trade restrictions. French refugees from plantation uprisings found common ground with British deserters, seeking new lives. Captain Valdez interrupted their newest resident, a young woman named Catherine Pierce, who served as their unofficial diplomat. "There's been a development regarding Captain Cross." Isabella and Blackwood exchanged concerned glances. Cross's threats had intensified over recent months, his demands for tribute growing increasingly unreasonable. Intelligence reports suggested he was gathering a substantial fleet, possibly planning a major assault on their island. "What kind of development?" Blackwood asked. "He's been captured by the Spanish," Catherine reported, with barely contained excitement. "Admiral Mendoza's fleet cornered him near the Windward Islands. Cross is being held in Cartagena's fortress, awaiting trial for attacks on Spanish treasure ships." Isabella felt a complex mixture of emotions at the news. Her father's intervention had eliminated their greatest threat, but it also meant he knew more about their operations than she had realized. The Spanish admiral was protecting his daughter indirectly, using official naval power to solve problems. His position prevented him from addressing openly. "There's more," Catherine continued. "The admiral sent a personal message." She handed Isabella a sealed letter bearing her father's familiar handwriting. The message was brief, but loaded with meaning. "My granddaughter deserves to grow up in safety. Consider Cross my birthday gift to Elena. Your devoted father, Admiral Diego Mendoza." "He knows about Elena," Isabella whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He's been watching over us." Blackwood read the letter over her shoulder, his expression thoughtful. "Your father is a practical man. He may not approve of your choices, but he recognizes accomplished fact. Elena is his granddaughter, regardless of her circumstances." The implications were staggering. If Admiral Mendoza publicly acknowledged Elena, she would inherit noble status in Spanish colonial society. But such recognition might also expose their location to less friendly Spanish officials, who viewed Hope Island as a threat to colonial monopolies. "We should write back," Isabella decided. "Invite him to visit, unofficially of course. Let him meet his granddaughter properly." That evening, as they celebrated Elena's birthday with the entire island community, Isabella reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been a desperate pregnant woman abandoned in Tortuga's dangerous port. Now she was co-captain of a thriving maritime community, mother to a healthy toddler, and expecting a second child with the man who had become her true partner in every sense. The governor's pardon represented more than legal protection. It symbolized acceptance by the established order they had once opposed. But more importantly, it validated their experiment in creating a different kind of society, one based on merit and mutual support, rather than birth and privilege. Elena's laughter echoed across the harbor as fireworks illuminated the night sky, each colorful burst reflecting off the calm water like scattered jewels. The child would grow up free to choose her own destiny, inheriting the best of both her parents' worlds while being limited by neither. It seemed like the perfect foundation for whatever adventures lay ahead. The poisoned chalice arrived, disguised as a diplomatic gift from Governor Dalton of Barbados, its silver surface gleaming innocently in the afternoon sun. Isabella accepted the ornate cup during what appeared to be routine trade negotiations, never suspecting that their growing success had made them targets for a more sophisticated kind of enemy. Two profitable partnerships, Governor Dalton's representative, a smooth-talking merchant named Charles Whitmore, proposed during their formal dinner. Maymape Island continued to prosper under enlightened leadership. Blackwood raised his own cup in response, but something in Whitmore's expression made Isabella hesitate. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, and his fingers drummed nervously against the table as he waited for them to drink. "James," Isabella said quietly, setting down her chalice. "Perhaps we should wait for Elena to join us before we toast. She loves ceremonies." 18-month-old Elena was napping under Dr. Weatherby's supervision, but Isabella's maternal instincts had saved them both. Blackwood caught her subtle warning and also lowered his cup, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol at his belt. "Surely business can't wait for a toddler's schedule," Whitmore protested, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the evening's coolness. "Family always comes first," Isabella replied firmly. "That's one of our island's founding principles." The evening proceeded with increasing tension as Whitmore grew more insistent about completing their toast. When he finally departed with his supposed trading proposals unsigned, Isabella and Blackwood immediately summoned Dr. Weatherby to examine the suspicious chalice. "Strychnine," the Scottish physician announced after careful analysis, "dissolved in the wine, probably enough to kill both of you within minutes. Whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. The assassination attempt sent shockwaves through Hope Island's leadership. They had grown comfortable with their success, perhaps too comfortable given the enemies their prosperity had inevitably created among established colonial powers. "It's not just about trade competition anymore," Blackwood realized as they reviewed recent intelligence reports. "We're threatening the entire colonial system by proving that alternative societies can work." Isabella's pregnancy complications began the next morning, whether from stress or coincidence no one could determine. Sharp cramping doubled her over during the emergency council meeting, forcing her to grip the conference table's edge while trying to maintain her composure. "Get Dr. Weatherby," Blackwood ordered, his voice tight with concern. "Cancel all meetings until further notice." "No," Isabella gasped between contractions. "We can't show weakness now. If word spreads that we're vulnerable." Another wave of pain silenced her temporarily. The doctor's examination revealed what they all felt. Isabella's body was rejecting the pregnancy under extreme stress. The poisoning attempt, though unsuccessful, had created psychological trauma that manifested physically in the most dangerous way possible. Complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. Dr. Weatherby prescribed. No stress, no business meetings, no responsibilities beyond recovering your health. 2 weeks, Isabella protested. "We're in the middle of delicate negotiations with 3 different colonial governments. I can't just disappear." "You can, and you will," Blackwood said with finality. "Rodriguez can handle day-to-day operations, Catherine can manage diplomatic contacts, and I'll deal with security concerns. Your only job is taking care of yourself and our unborn child." But Isabella's enforced absence created exactly the power vacuum their enemies had hoped to exploit. Within days, rumors began circulating through Caribbean ports that Hope Island's leadership was fractured, that the famous partnership between the Spanish noblewoman and reformed pirate captain had collapsed under pressure. Ships that had planned to dock at Hope Island diverted to other ports. Colonial officials who had been negotiating favorable agreements suddenly became unavailable for meetings. Even some of their own residents began questioning whether they should seek opportunities elsewhere. "They're trying to destroy us through reputation rather than force," Isabella observed from her bed, studying reports that painted an increasingly dire picture of their community's prospects. "It's actually quite clever. Clever or not, it's working," Blackwood admitted grimly. "We're losing credibility faster than we can rebuild it. And without credibility, a trading post is just an expensive collection of empty warehouses." Elena toddled into the room, carrying her wooden ship, oblivious to the adult tensions surrounding her. She climbed onto the bed beside her mother, chattering in her mixture of Spanish and English while playing with toy sailors. "Mama sick?" she asked, with the direct concern of childhood. "Mama's getting better," Isabella assured her daughter, though uncertainty clouded her voice. "We all are." But as reports continued arriving about Hope Island's declining fortunes, Isabella wondered if their remarkable experiment in Caribbean independence could survive the sophisticated attacks now being launched against everything they had built together. The signal mirror flashed desperately from the crow's nest of a merchant vessel on the horizon, its coded light pattern spelling out a message that chilled Isabella to the bone. "Blackwood captured. Help us." She adjusted the responding mirror with trembling hands, her advanced pregnancy making the climb to Hope Island's signal tower particularly challenging. 3 days had passed since Blackwood departed on what should have been a routine diplomatic mission to negotiate new trading agreements with colonial officials in Kingston. Intelligence suggested their enemies had laid a trap, using the promise of profitable contracts to lure him away from Hope Island's protective defenses. "Captain Valdez," Rodriguez called from below. "The mirror signals confirm it. Captain Blackwood is being held in Fort Charles. They're charging him with historical piracy crimes that predate his official pardon." Isabella's heart sank as she absorbed the implications. Fort Charles was Jamaica's most secure military prison, designed to hold the Caribbean's most dangerous criminals. Getting Blackwood out would require either substantial bribes or military action, both of which posed enormous risks to their community's carefully maintained neutrality. "Assemble the crew," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority that pregnancy and domesticity had never diminished. "We're going to need every experienced fighter we can muster." Elena clung to her mother's skirts as Isabella prepared for what might be Hope Island's most dangerous mission. At nearly 2 years old, the child had developed an uncanny ability to sense adult tensions, becoming clingy and tearful whenever her parents seemed worried. "Mama, go boat?" Elena asked, her dark eyes reflecting confusion about why her usually inseparable parents were suddenly apart. "Mama has to help Papa," Isabella explained, kneeling to embrace her daughter despite her swollen belly making the movement awkward. "Dr. Weatherby will take care of you until we come back." The rescue fleet consisted of 3 vessels, the Siren's Revenge under Isabella's command, a smaller sloop captained by the reliable Peterson, and a captured Spanish brigantine that Rodriguez had been converting into a legitimate merchant vessel. Together they could match most colonial naval forces, but attacking Fort Charles meant war with the British Empire. "There has to be another way," Dr. Weatherby protested, as Isabella reviewed battle plans. "You're 7 months pregnant. For God's sake, you shouldn't be commanding naval actions in your condition." "My condition didn't prevent me from building this community," Isabella replied sharply. "It won't prevent me from defending it either." The intelligence network Hope Island had developed over 2 years proved invaluable in planning their approach. Former colonial administrators, reformed pirates, and sympathetic merchants throughout the Caribbean provided detailed information about Fort Charles's defenses, guard rotations, and potential weaknesses. "The prison's water supply comes from a spring outside the main fortifications," reported Catherine Pierce, their diplomatic liaison. "If we could create a distraction there while the main force attacks from the harbor." "Too risky," Isabella decided. after studying the fortress blueprints. We need something more direct, something they won't expect from a pregnant woman leading a rescue mission. Her tactical brilliance had always complemented Blackwood's strategic thinking, but now Isabella had to prove she could command independently. The crew watched her with mixture of loyalty and concern. These hardened men who had followed her from desperate refugee to successful co-captain, now seeing her as their only hope of recovering their beloved leader. "Here's what we're going to do," Isabella announced, spreading detailed charts across the conference table. "We're going to give the British exactly what they think they want, a desperate pirate attack that plays into all their expectations about how criminals behave." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would stage a seemingly reckless frontal assault on Fort Charles, while secretly infiltrating the prison through maintenance tunnels that connected to Kingston's civilian water system. Isabella would lead the naval battle from the Siren's Revenge's deck, her visible pregnancy making the British underestimate the sophistication of their true strategy. "You're asking us to trust everything to misdirection," Rodriguez observed. "If they see through the deception, then we fight our way out," Isabella replied with the confidence that had made her legendary among Caribbean pirates. "But they won't see through it because they don't believe a pregnant woman can think tactically." As the rescue fleet prepared to depart Hope Island, Isabella took one last look at the community she and Blackwood had built together. The harbor bustled with legitimate commerce, the streets filled with families from a dozen different nations, all united by the revolutionary idea that people could choose their own destinies. Elena waved from Weatherby's arms as the Siren's Revenge's sails filled with wind, her tiny voice calling "Bye-bye, Mama," across the water. Isabella touched her swelling belly, silently promising both her children that she would bring their father home safely, no matter what it cost. The family portrait tucked inside Isabella's coat pocket showed an impossible scene: a reformed pirate captain, a Spanish admiral's daughter, and their toddler daughter posed together like any respectable colonial family. Weatherby had commissioned the miniature painting as a gift, capturing a moment of domestic happiness that now felt like something from another life entirely. Fort Charles loomed ahead through the pre-dawn darkness, its massive stone walls and bristling cannons designed to withstand anything the Caribbean's most dangerous pirates could unleash. Isabella stood on the Siren's Revenge's deck, her swollen belly making movement difficult, but her mind sharp with tactical calculations that would have impressed her naval officer father. "Signal the other ships," she ordered Rodriguez, who had insisted on remaining at her side despite her condition. "Begin the performance in exactly 10 minutes. The performance was crucial to their deception. While Isabella's fleet staged a dramatic but ultimately doomed frontal assault on the fortress, Peterson would lead a small team through Kingston's water tunnels to infiltrate the prison from below. The British would focus on the obvious threat while missing the real danger. "Isabella," Rodriguez said quietly, "if something happens to you during this fight, how do I explain it to your daughter? Or to Captain Blackwood?" "You don't explain it," Isabella replied, checking her pistols one final time. "You make sure it doesn't happen." The battle began with cannon fire that shook the harbor and rattled windows throughout Kingston. Isabella positioned herself prominently on the quarterdeck, her pregnancy obvious to any British officer watching through a spyglass. Let them see a desperate woman making emotional decisions rather than the calculating strategist she had become. "Come about hard to starboard," she called out, deliberately exposing the Siren's Revenge's vulnerable stern to the fortress guns. "Give them a target they can't resist." British cannonballs splashed harmlessly into the water around their ships, the fortress gunners following predictable patterns that Isabella had studied for weeks. She needed to maintain the illusion of incompetence while keeping her crew safe, a delicate balance that required perfect timing. Inside Fort Charles, Peterson's infiltration team moved through maintenance tunnels that stank of sewage and decades of neglect. The former carpenter had proven surprisingly adept at covert operations, his quiet manner and unremarkable appearance making him nearly invisible to guards who expected pirates to look like popular illustrations in London newspapers. "There," whispered Tommy Briggs, now grown into a competent young sailor whose loyalty to Isabella bordered on worship. The cell block is directly above us. They had studied prison layouts obtained through bribes and careful reconnaissance, identifying weaknesses in a fortress designed to repel external attacks rather than internal infiltration. The British had never imagined that reformed pirates might possess the discipline and intelligence for sophisticated operations. On the harbor, Isabella's pregnancy complicated her command in ways she hadn't anticipated. The baby seemed to sense the battle's excitement, kicking restlessly against her ribs and making concentration difficult. She gripped the ship's rail during a particularly strong contraction, using the pain to focus her determination. "Captain," called out Murphy, the toothless gunner who had once laughed at her presence aboard their ship. British reinforcements approaching from the east. 2 frigates and a ship of the line. Isabella studied the approaching vessels through her spyglass, calculating distances and wind speeds with the expertise learned from months of legitimate trading. The reinforcements would arrive in approximately 20 minutes. Just enough time for Peterson to complete his mission if everything went perfectly. "Signal the retreat," she ordered. "Make it look panicked and disorganized." The Siren's Revenge turned away from Fort Charles with apparent desperation, her crew shouting and gesturing in ways designed to convince British observers that their attack had failed spectacularly. But Isabella's sharp eyes tracked the small boat slipping away from the fortress's blind side, carrying precious cargo toward their rendezvous point. "Got him," Peterson's voice carried across the water as his boat approached. "Captain Blackwood is hurt, but alive, and we picked up some additional intelligence that you need to hear." Blackwood looked haggard and pale when they hauled him aboard, his face bearing fresh bruises from interrogation sessions, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him legendary, and his first concern was for Isabella's welfare rather than his own injuries. "You magnificent, stubborn woman," he said, embracing her carefully. "You could have been killed attempting this rescue." "So could you," Isabella replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. "That's what family means. We protect each other, no matter the risk." The family portrait in her pocket had survived the battle undamaged, its painted faces smiling up at them like a promise of the peaceful future they were still fighting to secure. The crown jewel from the Spanish royal collection gleamed in Isabella's palm, its faceted emerald catching lamplight like captured ocean depth. Blackwood had obtained it years ago during a raid on a treasure galleon, never imagining it would become the key to purchasing their family's permanent freedom from colonial persecution. "Governor Dalton wants this specific gem," Blackwood explained, still recovering from his imprisonment, but alert enough to negotiate their most crucial deal. "It once belonged to Queen Isabella of Castile, the same monarch your namesake. He believes returning it to Spanish authorities will earn him a promotion to the Council of the Indies." Isabella held the jewel up to the light, studying its flawless surface, while her unborn child moved restlessly within her. 8 months pregnant and exhausted from the rescue mission, she understood that this negotiation would determine whether their children grew up as fugitives or as respected members of Caribbean society. And in exchange for this historically significant emerald, Governor Dalton provides us with what exactly, she asked. "Complete legitimacy," Catherine Pierce replied from her position as their diplomatic representative. "Official recognition of Hope Island as a neutral trading territory. Protection under British colonial law, and most importantly, permanent pardons for all residents regardless of their previous occupation." The final battle for their community's survival would be fought not with cannons and cutlasses, but with documents and diplomatic protocol. Isabella's education as a Spanish nobleman's daughter finally proved its worth in ways her father had never intended. Her understanding of colonial politics revealing strategies that pure piracy could never have achieved. "There's more," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying the weight of difficult decisions. "Dalton knows about your true identity, Isabella. He's offering to suppress that information permanently, ensuring Elena's safety from both Spanish royal claims and British colonial ambition." The implications were staggering. As Admiral Mendoza's daughter, Isabella could theoretically claim noble privileges throughout Spanish America, but those same privileges would make Elena a valuable political hostage, a pawn in the endless conflicts between European colonial powers. We accept, Isabella decided without hesitation. Our children's freedom is worth more than any treasure. The exchange took place at dawn in Kingston's harbour, with representatives from 3 colonial governments witnessing the transfer. Governor Dalton accepted the crown jewel with barely concealed triumph, while Spanish and Dutch officials observed the proceedings that would transform Hope Island from pirate refuge to legitimate neutral territory. Isabella's pregnancy complications chose that moment to intensify, sharp contractions doubling her over as she signed the final documents that secured their community's future. Dr. Weatherby, positioned discreetly nearby, moved quickly to support her as the diplomatic ceremony concluded. "The baby's coming early," Isabella gasped, her water breaking as she attempted to stand. "This child has terrible timing, or perfect timing," Blackwood replied, supporting her weight while their former enemies became official allies. Born free, under no nation's flag but our own. The birth took place aboard the Siren's Revenge, while Hope Island's new legal status was being proclaimed throughout the Caribbean. Isabella's son entered the world as cannon fire marked their transformation from outlaws to respected merchants, his first cries mixing with celebrations that echoed across the harbour. "Diego," Isabella whispered, naming him after her father, while Dr. Weatherby cleaned and swaddled the infant. "Diego Valdez Blackwood, citizen of Hope Island." Elena met her baby brother with the solemn curiosity of childhood, studying his tiny features while chattering in her mixture of languages. The toddler had grown up believing that families naturally consisted of reformed pirates, former colonial administrators, and refugees from half a dozen nations. "Papa home baby here," Elena announced with the logic that only children possess, as if the universe had simply rearranged itself according to her expectations. The crown jewel that had purchased their legitimacy was already on its way to Spain, carried by a Spanish naval vessel that flew Admiral Mendoza's personal flag. Isabella's father would finally hold the emerald that had secured his grandchildren's future, perhaps understanding at last why his daughter had chosen love over privilege. "No more running," Blackwood said softly, holding his newborn son while Isabella rested after the difficult birth. "No more hiding who we are or what we've built here." Hope Island's transformation was complete. What had begun as a desperate bargain between a pregnant woman and a calculating pirate had evolved into something unprecedented in Caribbean history, a truly free community, where people's worth was measured by their contributions rather than their bloodlines. As the sun set over their legitimized kingdom, Isabella watched her husband hold their son while Elena played with her wooden ship nearby. The family portrait in her pocket had become reality, painted not in oils but in the daily lives of people who had chosen to build something better than what they had inherited. The school bell rang across Hope Island's bustling harbour, calling children of former pirates, escaped slaves and colonial refugees, to lessons taught in 3 languages by teachers who understood that education was the truest freedom. 5-year-old Elena helped her 3-year-old brother Diego navigate the wooden steps to their classroom, both children chattering excitedly about the day's geography lesson on Caribbean trade routes. "Mama, why do we learn Spanish and English and Dutch?" Elena asked during their evening meal, her question reflecting the natural curiosity of a child who had never known prejudice. "Tommy's father says we should just speak English because we live under British protection now." Isabella exchanged an amused glance with Blackwood before answering their daughter's question. "Because the world is bigger than any one language, sweetheart. When you grow up, you'll want to speak with people from many places, understand their stories, maybe even travel to their countries like grandfather Diego." Elena continued, referring to Admiral Mendoza, who had finally visited Hope Island the previous year. The meeting between the Spanish naval commander and his pirate son-in-law had been awkward but ultimately productive, resulting in unofficial Spanish recognition of their neutral status. "Exactly like grandfather Diego," Isabella confirmed. "He speaks 6 languages and has sailed to places we can only imagine." Hope Island's success had exceeded their most optimistic projections. The settlement now hosted a permanent population of over 800 residents, with daily ship traffic that rivaled established colonial ports. Their neutral status attracted merchants who preferred to avoid the endless taxes and regulations that hampered trade in traditional territories. Rodriguez, now bearing the official title of Harbor Master, submitted his weekly report during their family dinner. 17 ships in port today, Captain. Sugar from Barbados, coffee from Jamaica, silver goods from New Spain, and textiles from Amsterdam. The warehouses are full, and we've got more requests for space than we can accommodate. Time to expand the harbor again, Blackwood observed, bouncing baby Diego on his knee. At 6 months old, the boy had developed his mother's dark eyes and his father's adventurous spirit, constantly attempting to crawl toward anything potentially dangerous. Weatherby had established the Caribbean's first integrated medical school, training students from across the colonial world in advanced surgical techniques and tropical medicine. Former pirates worked alongside reformed slaves and educated colonists, all united by the revolutionary idea that healing knowledge belonged to humanity rather than any particular race or class. The British Admiralty has made another request, Catherine Pierce reported during their evening council meeting. They want to establish a permanent liaison office here, officially recognizing Hope Island as a neutral diplomatic territory. Isabella considered the implications while nursing young Diego. Official diplomatic recognition would provide additional security, but might also compromise the carefully maintained independence that made their community unique. They had succeeded precisely because they belonged to no single empire. Counter-proposal, she decided. We'll accept diplomatic representatives from all colonial powers equally. British, Spanish, French, Dutch, everyone gets the same access and the same restrictions. That could be complicated, Blackwood warned. European powers don't like treating each other as equals. Then they'll learn to do it here, or they'll find somewhere else to conduct their business. Isabella replied with the confidence of someone who had built something truly valuable. The evening's tranquility was interrupted by Elena's excited voice from the balcony. "Mama! Papa! Look at all the lights in the harbor!" They joined their children outside, marveling at the scene that had become routine but never lost its magic. Ships from a dozen nations rode at anchor, their lanterns creating a constellation of warm light on the dark water. Somewhere among those vessels were reformed pirates, turned legitimate merchants, escaped slaves building new lives, and colonial administrators seeking opportunities outside traditional hierarchies. Old Pete, now bearing the honorary title of Master Craftsman, had established workshops that trained young people in traditional maritime skills while adapting to changing technologies. His wooden ships had evolved into precision instruments, toys that taught navigation and seamanship to children who might never need to fight for survival but should understand their maritime heritage. "Remember when we first arrived here?" Isabella asked Blackwood as they watched their children play on the balcony. "You said you needed motivation, and I needed a place where I could live. Turns out we both needed something we didn't know how to ask for," Blackwood replied, his arm around her waist as Diego crawled determinedly toward the railing. "We needed a family bus. The school bell would ring again tomorrow, calling another generation to lessons that prepared them for a world where people chose their own destinies rather than accepting the limitations of birth or circumstance. It seemed like the perfect legacy for two people who had refused to let other people's expectations define their possibilities. The ship's wheel that once guided the Siren's revenge through Caribbean storms now hung on the wall of Isabella and Blackwood's study, transformed into artwork that reminded them daily of how far they had traveled from their desperate beginning. Polished mahogany spokes caught the morning light streaming through windows that overlooked the harbor where their legend had become reality. 10 years had passed since Isabella first approached Blackwood's ship with nothing but fierce determination and an unborn child. Now she sat at an elegant desk, reviewing correspondence from colonial governors, merchant princes, and even European monarchs who sought Hope Island's services as neutral mediators in trade disputes. "Mama, the baby's kicking," announced 7-year-old Elena, resting her hand on Isabella's swollen belly. Their third child would arrive within weeks, another addition to a family that had grown beyond anything either parent had imagined possible. 5-year-old Diego burst into the study, carrying a wooden sword crafted by old Pete, his enthusiasm for mock battles inherited equally from both parents' adventurous spirits. "Pete says you were once the most feared pirate in the Caribbean. Is that true?" Isabella laughed, the sound mixing maternal warmth with memories of genuinely dangerous times. "Your papa likes to exaggerate, but yes, we had some adventures before you were born." Blackwood appeared in the doorway, now bearing the official title of Commissioner of Maritime Affairs, a position that allowed him to use his intimate knowledge of piracy to combat it more effectively than any traditional colonial administrator. His hair showed grey at the temples, but his eyes still held the calculating intelligence that had made him legendary. "The Spanish treasure fleet will dock tomorrow," he reported, settling into the chair beside Isabella's desk. "Admiral Mendoza sends his regards and asks if the children would like to tour his flagship. Grandfather's ship has 42 cannons," Elena informed her brother, with the authority of someone who had counted them personally, "and a library with books in 7 languages. The relationship between Isabella's father and his unconventional son-in-law had evolved from suspicious tolerance to genuine mutual respect. Admiral Mendoza now used Hope Island as an unofficial intelligence center, gathering information about pirate activities that threatened Spanish shipping while maintaining the fiction that he disapproved of his daughter's choices. "There's something else," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying the weight of significant news. "The British Admiralty has offered me a commission as Commodore of Anti-Piracy Operations for the entire Caribbean. Full restoration of rank and privileges, substantial salary, and official recognition of our work here." Isabella studied her husband's expression, reading the conflict between pride and uncertainty. Such recognition represented complete vindication of their transformation from outlaws to respected leaders, but it also meant additional responsibilities that might compromise Hope Island's carefully maintained neutrality. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "That I needed to discuss it with my co-captain before making any decisions. Their partnership had evolved far beyond the desperate rabble that brought them together." Isabella now managed Hope Island's complex diplomatic relationships, while Blackwood oversaw maritime security and trade regulation. Their different backgrounds, her noble education and his practical experience, created a synergy that neither could have achieved alone. "The children should have a say too," Isabella decided. "This affects their future as much as ours." Elena and Diego exchanged glances with the silent communication that characterized siblings who had grown up in extraordinary circumstances. They had never known poverty or desperation, but they understood the value of the freedoms their parents had fought to secure. "Will we still live on Hope Island?" Elena asked with the directness of childhood. "Will our friends still be? Will the school still teach everyone together regardless of where they came from?" "Those are the important questions," Isabella agreed. "What do you think, Diego?" The 5-year-old considered seriously, his expression mirroring his father's thoughtful intensity. "I think Papa should do whatever helps the most people. That's what you taught us. We help people who need help." Isabella felt the baby kick strongly, as if agreeing with its brother's wisdom. This child would be born into a world of possibilities that hadn't existed when Elena entered life during a naval battle. The legacy they had built extended far beyond their own family to encompass hundreds of people who had found new chances at Hope Island. "Accept the commission," Isabella advised, her hand covering Blackwood's weathered fingers. "But with conditions. Hope Island remains neutral territory. Our children grow up free to choose their own paths, and we never forget that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold or silver, but the people who choose to trust you with their dreams." The ship's wheel on their wall had guided them through storms toward calmer waters, but the real journey was just beginning for the next generation, who would inherit the world they had dared to imagine into existence.